Welcome, everybody, to the Delta CX YouTube channel, where I'm also reminding you to check out our other YouTube channel, CX-CC. I'm Debbie Levitt from Delta CX, and welcome to our critical thinking stream, which we do on some Fridays. And a lot of people have been talking about what's going on at IDEO, and there seems to be a little bit of breaking news there with them losing some revenue and having layoffs. So I figured let's talk about this a little bit. Now, I don't have any inside knowledge, so since it's a critical thinking stream, we might have more questions than answers, but I think it's always important to do critical thinking and still have those questions. So before we get started, of course, as always, I want to thank everybody who is a paid member of our Patreon. You can join our Patreon at patreon.com/CXCC. It is as little as $1 American per month for the paid version, or you can go with the free version, which is essentially like being on my mailing list and being the first to know things. So what I'm going to do today, and I want to, of course, if you're watching live, I want your comments and thoughts and questions. And if you're watching the YouTube video later, I, of course, want you to leave some comments and tell me what you think about all of this. But let's put up my magical screen sharing universe. Hey, Ana Lucia. And remember, this shares all of my screens, so I'm sure we'll see something embarrassing. All right, so let's take a look at where a lot of us started. Let's see, is this? Yeah, here we go. So here's me in the chat room and my screen. Many people saw this Fast Company article, but it's behind a paywall, so I just paid so we can at least skim through some of this stuff. And this article is from last week, so again, this is a bit of breaking news for people. I'll put it also in the breaking news playlist. Sorry, I've got this lingering thing hanging here. But basically, let's see, there are going to be, or have been, huge layoffs at IDEO, and I hope I'm pronouncing them correctly. Anybody tell me if they're pronounced some other way. It's not a company that I've been following very closely for a long time, since I feel that they've been responsible for more negative things than positive things. So if I'm saying them wrong, that just shows you that. Not a fan. So let's see, the morning of October 2nd, the layoffs were announced. Roughly 25% of global workers, but they've already been laying off workers. Evidently in 2020, the headcount was 725 roughly, so they were already down to 500, which meant that, you know, another, gosh, that seems like about a third of people were laid off. So you have a third and then you have a further 25%. And that is certainly unfortunate. I'm not happy about anybody being laid off, and so I don't want people to think any of this is glee for the people who lost their jobs. I don't want to see that happen to anybody, but I'm not a fan of IDEO. So let's take a look at what's going on here. So IDEO has been around for many decades. IDEO was originally one of those design firms who did a lot of products and some industrial design stuff. Like here they talk about a breast pump and a toothbrush and colon cancer screenings and air travel. So they were really seen as a top design firm when you needed to reinvent or rethink the way something was done. And it looks like, and this was something I didn't know, that in 2016 they were acquired. I don't even think I knew that. I don't know if anybody else knew that there is some sort of Japanese holding company that owns them. The former CEO that many people talk about, Tim Brown, stepped down in 2019, and then they had someone named Sandy, and again, I might pronounce this wrong, Speicher, was promoted to CEO and then stepped down in 2022. And I remember when we did, I think, our episode 108 on what isn't design thinking, we read a quote from Sandy describing design thinking during a live interview, and we still couldn't tell what it was based on what Sandy said, and we thought that was a little strange. But this is pointing to some controversies that happened in the period of time. I'm sure it's been happening for a long time, but this CEO stepped down. So we had this article come out in 2020 about a strange Instagram post that they said had to do with white guilt, which everyone found strange. It seemed to reference other things that people couldn't find. So this one's a little hard for me to follow. But really the most damning thing, in my opinion, is this article that came out on Medium in spring 2021. A former IDEO employee interviewed, I think, 23 other current and former IDEO employees and found a mountain of terrible stuff. I mean, really bad stuff, bad internal treatment of employees, bad projects and things. Ana Lucia says, when I read that thing about the era of design thinking is over a couple of days ago, I thought, thank God, can we start with the knowledge design era? Yeah, I do wish that, but then I also worry someone will, water it down as this had. If you haven't read this Medium article called Surviving IDEO, it is difficult. That's why there is the author put a content warning here. Trauma, workplace abuse, power, manipulation. It is not a comfortable read, but I think we need to read it anyway. And I think that was not good for IDEO. Going back to the layoffs article, it also notes that in the last few years, they've lost about a third of their revenue. That's a very significant drop. It's not down 1% or 5%. It's down quite significantly. That's down, 67%? That's a huge drop, which is so strange. And the interesting thing to me about this as well is that there's a weird circle happening here, because when I wrote this article called Was Design Thinking Designed to Not Work?, which you can find on Medium, I started with someone else's article. I started with Maggie Graham's article called On Design Thinking, which is a wonderful, excellent article. All the credit to Maggie for that one. I'm writing, a subversion of that with some of my own commentary, but Maggie really uncovered great stuff. And it was interesting that IDEO kind of invented or reinvented design thinking in the early 2000s because their revenue had dropped severely. So if we look back at some of the timeline of stuff, so we have 1991 when it was founded, and let's see, and then by 2000, early 2000s, so maybe 10-ish years later, they're already hitting hard times. They're not able to win the business that they wanted. People aren't seeing as much need for them. So they decide, well, let's sell training and workshops and a method instead of selling the projects and the work, and that was a deliberate choice. And so you can trace back the history of IDEO's design thinking, of version and training, and how it's all training and certificates and courses, because that was where the money was, and in many ways still is, for IDEO and other people selling design thinking, design sprints, and things like that. So I think it's interesting that they invented design, or at least invented what many of us think of as design thinking, since the term did exist, I think, since the 1960s. But many of us who think of design thinking think of what IDEO sold. But another thing that I notice, and the author here points out the criticism of design thinking, was this right here. And it's something that I've mentioned before and people haven't always reacted to, but let's take a moment to think about it. Most IDEO projects consist of about 6 to 12 weeks of work, delivering research insights, design principles, corporate workshops, prototypes, and product roadmaps. So again, the idea that they're going to sell you can solve a problem in 5 days, or with these workshops, which again is work you could measure in hours or days, but they're coming in and sometimes working for months. I always felt was one of the things that made design thinking highly questionable. I always used to say, that IDEO is being hired for more than 5 days. They're doing weeks of work at, I'm sure, a very high billable rate. IDEO's rates are not cheap, just behind McKinsey's. Right. Let's see. $2 million of climate-related work in the last year. Now they want to talk about AI. Who doesn't? And it looks like they may refocus on Asia, maybe because of who owns them. I remember hearing that they were going to try to redo design thinking because of design thinking being often controversial for being kind of often colonialist or a very white or white savior perspective. And that's also brought up in this Surviving IDEO article where, and I actually did read the whole thing. Very often I can't stand to read entire articles, and I did read this one maybe last year or the year before, so it's not totally fresh in my mind, but there was definitely a lot of discussion here about going to other regions to try to solve serious problems, water, education, sanitation, and a lot of times IDEO really didn't get to know local people, and they just kind of came in with more of a white savior attitude and photo opportunity. Let's take lots of pictures of us with these natives or locals or indigenous peoples and put that in our marketing. Someone was telling me the other day a story, and I didn't try to track this down, but they were telling me a story about how, who's telling me this, about how IDEO went someplace to try to help that area with water, and that it was typically a woman's job to go out and get water for the family, and that they found some other way to bring water to the family in the community. And because of the culture in the area, this was like the only time a woman got to leave the house and the only time a woman got to talk to other women, because otherwise this culture was more of a strict culture in which women stayed home and did what they were told and didn't get to speak to anybody. And once IDEO helped water get brought to the village or town or region, these people had no reason to leave their house and kind of weren't allowed to. Or again, I didn't look up this story, but it was kind of an example of, sure, we're going to solve your problem, but really not thinking about the culture and other ramifications of the work being done. So that's where we have to bring back humanity and human-centered design. We can't just look at, oh, we wish people would click this button more, or we wish people would buy this thing more, or we should have more education, sanitation, water. Sure, those things sound good, but let's make sure we're really understanding all of the angles of something, and not just from a colonialist perspective. I think that's where a lot of this goes wrong. I also wanted to talk about, Ana Lucia says, they really tried to solve world's hunger. I'm all for helping people, but that's a massive undertaking for just a company. Yeah, I agree. When you get to IDEO's website, there's a lot of courses that they would be happy to sell you. Courses, certificates, all kinds of things. And that's the articles I've seen haven't said how much of their money is made from this. And obviously, in a sense, they've cannibalized themselves, because if they're going to teach you that doing a 5-day design thinking adventure is just as good as what IDEO does, then you can cannibalize your own business. Now, I don't know if that's exactly their message, but it'd be really weird if their message were, hey, we do design thinking and you can too, and you can learn how to do it, but you'll never be as good as we are. And I think the message that people heard, whether or not IDEO intended it, was, if you learn design thinking, you are just as good as IDEO. Sure, IDEO was or might be hiring industrial designers, human factors engineers, people with all kinds of talents and skills and abilities and experience and other depth and breadth that you and your team may not have at all. But hey, you're a design thinker. So that's where I get worried about this stuff. But I saw that there were some courses here, and now I'm having trouble finding it because I just opened up this page today to talk about it. But there was one where they were trying to make it sound like, oh, if you take this course, you're going to be able, like when I watched the video for it, it was all like B-roll of bringing water to villages and stuff. Is it this one? Let's see if it's this one. Yeah, look, we're going to solve no food, wildfire. What else? Stuff is on fire. Crop dusting. Climate change protesters. Yeah, this is the video I watched. So even though we can't hear it right now, you can see the captions. And to me, the message is, take this course and you too can solve lack of food. You know, like they're just saying, hey, this is just an iceberg, and you just have to look below the iceberg to solve these problems. I remember looking at this video maybe last year or earlier this year, because it's November 2023, and thinking, this is extremely, it's funny, for people telling you to look below the surface of the iceberg, this seems really shallow and a surface way to say, oh, we're going to solve wildfires and no food in the supermarket. Here it's voting, political systems. Ask yourself, why hasn't an event happened? Think about the structural elements that might explain what you're seeing. Start with what you can see. Uncover deeper stuff. Mindsets are hard to see. Like, what are they saying here? It's like an endless amount of weird B-roll. Like, I feel like they just got a Storyblok subscription and went wild. Mindsets are an important part. You know, if you can shift mindsets, do we always have to shift mindsets, or can't we learn what someone's mindset is and work with that, work for that? Is it still human-centered if we try to change a mindset? Isn't it okay for people to have their own mindset? But I want to start that video again because I just want you to see the B-roll and think about the messages they're sending about what types of problems you can solve if you take this course. No food, traffic, fire, power, energy, crop dusting, protests, and white lady. Fantastic. So let's take a look at what they're saying. Visualize the system. Explore mapping tools. Create a systems map based on your systems challenge. What are some other types of maps you could use? I think this was the one where when I looked deeper at it, they were going to tell you that the way to solve a problem was to come up with the problem and interview a couple of experts about it. Define your challenge in the form of a question. What's the difference? A challenge is a challenge. What if it's not in a question? I'm so tired of this how might we. Hasn't anyone noticed that how might we is bizarrely focused on we? What are some ways you bring this mindset to your work? This just seems so surface for what it claims to be. Does it tell you what this costs? Enroll as a team. No, let's enroll, right? What do we think this costs? $800. That's not bad. And I think these prices have gone down because maybe they're a little bit stuck and it's a tough economic time. But I still can't recommend a course like this. This just doesn't seem to make sense. We're going to map the system, humanize the system. How are we going to humanize the system? This is what it was. Choose one stakeholder from your map and conduct an in-depth interview. Then reframe your challenge and identify an opportunity for redesign. From talking to one stakeholder, not a lot of people, not talking to the people who are affected by this, not talking about the customers or users or humans or society. Talk to one stakeholder and identify an opportunity for redesign. This is the stuff that worries me about not being human-centered, being white saviory, these are the things that I'm concerned about. Pick one or two ideas and choose one that's potentially high impact but easy to implement. Are the highest impact ideas usually easy to implement? What kind of problem are we solving here? We just saw fire, no food, electricity, traffic. So the stakeholders hold the key to solve the human problem, says Ana Lucia. Yeah, I've got questions. So to me, I can see why people might be moving away from trying to bring this stuff into their company. Is this a terrible course? I don't know. I haven't taken it, but I'm extremely suspicious of it. I'm extremely worried that this is extremely, can I say extremely again, surface level, lacking depth, claiming they're doing human-centered design, but mostly going with your own ideas and talking to one stakeholder. Please don't ever do that and assume or claim it's human-centered design. It just can't be. It's centered around one human. That is just not the right way to go. So these are my fiery hot takes on some of the... This is being grumpy. I'm trying to go back to a big screen of me. And it's not doing it. Weird. Oh, I've got all these things up. Let's see. Let's try this. Hi, that's better. That was a little tech mistake. Totally done by me. Ana Lucia says, it's important to involve stakeholders in research and design process, but not like that for sure. Yeah, I'm always concerned about people who say, we're going to talk to a couple of users and then solve the problem. Or I'm going to interview some stakeholders, see what their perspective is on things, and then map out some stuff and solve the problem. I always am worried that that is way too shallow and way too internal or stakeholder focused, especially if we're claiming to solve problems for outside users. If you're claiming to just solve a problem for your stakeholder, then sure, get your stakeholder's perspective, fix something for your stakeholder. We don't need to talk to anybody else. This was great. But I think if we really care about human-centered design, then I think we do need to continue questioning not just whatever IDEO is doing, but design thinking, design sprints, lean UX, anything that's trying to take human-centered design, which is a thorough process with depth and rigor, and boil it down to hours or days of mostly just map stuff. And, you know, we even saw on the screen before, it just looked like just make a map out of some things that you think are going on for people, or just talk to one stakeholder and make your map. And so I think we have to be careful because these are certainly attractive. It sounds great to take an easy $800 course to be able to solve serious problems in your company for your customers or for the larger society. I understand the attraction of it, but I'm very concerned about the reality of it. These are typically not how these things are solved. And if this were how these things were solved, why aren't they better yet? Because we've made it sound like we just need to do some interviews and run some workshops and we can solve all of these problems. Yet I'm not seeing problems solved. I'm not even seeing, most companies are not innovating. Most companies are not delivering great products and services. So these are my concerns. So again, I'm sorry that IDEO is laying people off. I'm sorry that companies are laying people off. I don't want to see people losing their jobs, but I do think we need to take critical thinking looks at the techniques we've been bringing into companies now for the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Because IDEO has been selling design thinking, their flavor of it, for about 20 years now. And we've got Agile, and we have Fake Lean. Hi, Neelam. Sounds like my UX bootcamp in a nutshell. Yeah, absolutely. If you want to learn design thinking or some extremely minimized microscopic version of UX, there's much cheaper ways to do it. There's plenty of free videos on YouTube. There's books. There's courses on Udemy or wherever. There's many ways to learn these things, but there are very few ways at this point in time when I'm recording this in November 2023. There's very few ways to learn the really in-depth approaches to the type of problem finding and problem solving we should do. And again, take a hint from the part of the article that said even IDEO typically does projects 6 to 12 weeks. They're not coming in doing a 1-week design thinking adventure or design sprint adventure and then going, yep, you are done, validated, solved, boom. So even they're doing these types of things. At my company, Delta CX, we tend to do very often 6-week research projects in which we're able to learn more about the target audience, create problem statements, and start to consider some high-level things that might solve those problems. You don't have to go with our solutions. You can always run with the problem statements and your understanding of the target audiences and solve it your own way. but we look at how we would solve that, and the ecosystem that we would create, and the product or service roadmap that we would suggest. And that's a project that we do in about 6 weeks, and we've been charging about $60,000 for it. I don't want to imagine what IDEO charges for something like that. They're probably overcharging and we're probably undercharging, but we would rather give you that big consulting company, what you expect from a big consulting company, except we're going to do it better, faster, and cheaper. So I think it's time to take some of these big companies off their pedestals. We've seen recent exposés on McKinsey. We've seen Accenture fall from grace. We've seen other companies. We have a lot of questions about what they're doing and how they're doing it and things like that. So I think we just have to keep asking critical thinking questions. And I believe that we're going to see a rise of smaller agencies and consultancies, not just mine. There's lots of people. I can't tell you how many people in my LinkedIn in the past few weeks have said, I've decided not to go back into the corporate world and I'm starting my own agency or consultancy. I'm going to be a fractional CPO or fractional CMO or fractional CXO, which we also offer. Amy says, an easy way to get great results, and it's not the case with almost every type of problem. Design thinking is snake oil, with no offense to snakes. Yeah, snakes are mostly good, sometimes not. But yes, so we've got to wind down for today. You probably heard the gong go off. I wanted to keep this one under a half hour, so I just wanted to thank everybody for coming. If you're watching this show later, leave us some comments in the YouTube, under the YouTube video. I always love to read those and write back to you. But we're going to just say goodbye for now. I hope to see everybody at our Google Meet on Monday. We're going to be talking about being a contractor or freelancer, and we're going to be talking with an accountant so we can stop making financial mistakes as a contractor and freelancer. So check that out. That's at cxcc.to/events. And again, this is the Delta CX YouTube channel. Won't you please subscribe to our other one? That's where we're putting most of our videos nowadays. CX-CC. And again, you can join the Patreon for free or for paid, patreon.com/CXCC. So thanks again to everybody for joining. Happy Friday. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week. Bye.